Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Juicebox Podcast. Today I'll be speaking with Alyssa. She's 30 years old and she has type 1 diabetes. She was diagnosed at 3 years old. She also has hypothyroidism. Alyssa has 3 children, 12, 3, and 6 weeks old. Her 12-year-old also has type 1. Nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan. When you place your first order for AG1 with my link, you'll get 5 free travel packs and a free year's supply of vitamin D. drinkag1.com/juicebox. Don't forget to save 40% off of your entire order at CozyEarth.com. All you have to do is use the offer code JUICEBOX at checkout. That's JUICEBOX at checkout to save 40% at CozyEarth.com. And if you have type 1 diabetes or are the caregiver of someone with type 1, like Alyssa, go to t1dexchange.org/juicebox, join the registry, and complete their survey. When you complete that survey, your answers will help type 1 diabetes research to move forward. You can do all of that right from your sofa in about 10 minutes. t1dexchange.org/juicebox. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by the Dexcom G7, made for all types of diabetes. Dexcom G7 can be used to manage type 1, type 2, and gestational diabetes. You're going to see the speed, direction, and number of your blood sugar right on your receiver or smartphone device. Dexcom.com/juicebox. This show is sponsored today by the glucagon that my daughter carries, Gvoke HypoPen. Find out more at gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox.
Hi, Scott. My name is Alyssa. I am 30 years old. I'm a type 1 diabetic, and I also have a type 1 child.
Okay. How old were you when you were diagnosed?
I was 3.
27 years ago.
Yep, 27 years.
I like starting the day off with easy math. Your child has type 1. How many kids do you have?
I have 3 kids. I have a 12-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 6-week-old.
Oh, my God. Really?
Yeah. Yep.
Which one has diabetes?
My 3-year-old.
Your 3-year-old does. Any other autoimmune?
I also have hypothyroidism. And then my husband has pulmonary sarcoidosis.
Okay. When did he find that out?
Actually, about 4 or 5 months after our 3-year-old was born.
No kidding. What does that do to his life?
So he periodically has to get his lungs scanned and checked. He gets nodules in his lungs that could build up into scarring if it's not treated and taken care of. So he does periodically have to go onto like prednisone or other treatments.
I see. That's working for him so far?
Yeah, it's been working pretty well for him. He gets scanned every once in a while. You know, if he starts to feel sick and stuff, he'll get it more so in his chest. So he has to be careful, you know, when he gets sick to make sure that he treats his lungs correctly.
Yeah, pulmonary sarcoidosis.
Yep.
I can't believe more people are saying sarcoidosis on the podcast.
Yeah, I heard an episode not long ago talking about sarcoidosis.
I was like, get out of here. When that person said it, I was like, I know you're making this up, but they weren't.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. It is a rare disease. The cause is unknown.
Yep.
Inflammation. I see. They call it autoimmune?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, then there's maybe no wonder you're
both sides.
Your 3-year-old got type 1, right?
Yeah.
What about on your family side?
Nobody else has diabetes. I did have, I guess, a great-grandfather who maybe had type 2 diabetes, and that's about it. And on my husband's side, my mother-in-law also has type 2, but no one besides my daughter and I have been type 1.
No more, even thyroid, celiac?
I've got some distant family members with thyroid.
Yeah. Okay.
And no, nobody has celiac.
Just interesting to see how the tree grows, you know?
Oh, I know. And I know once, you know, you have one autoimmune, you're more likely to get another one. So I didn't actually have issues with my thyroid until after or during my pregnancy with my 3-year-old.
During it popped up at first.
Yeah. So I had to take some Synthroid while I was pregnant. And then after I delivered her, I actually had an overactive thyroid. and they thought I had Graves' disease, but it turned out that was not the case. And my thyroid ended up not producing what it was supposed to. And I ended up going back on Synthroid, and I've been on it since.
I see. Is it working for you?
Yeah. Yeah. I have not had any issues, since after having her.
Great. Oh, that's excellent. And then you still had another baby because...
Yes.
Would you have a room open or something like that?
No, my daughter was diagnosed 3 days before her first birthday. And we had been talking about trying to have another baby, before that. And then unfortunately, when she was diagnosed, we kind of said, I'm not sure. Not sure if we're going to have any more. We'll wait and see. Mm-hmm. And we did. We waited a couple of months, and then we started having that conversation again. And of course, it weighed heavy on us, if we should or should not have another child, because of course, we were worried that if we have another child, someone else will have diabetes in our family. But we did end up trying to have another baby. And unfortunately, we did have a miscarriage at the beginning of the year last year.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. And then, but we ended up about within 2 months later getting pregnant with our son, who's just born 6 weeks ago.
Okay. Well, congratulations. And you named him Scott, I imagine?
No, his name is Elias.
Oh, all right. Well, that's fine. Okay. So, that's lovely. Good for you. Congratulations. It's very nice.
Thank you.
We done, or we want more kids?
No, we're done.
Yeah. I don't know how you're paying for these 3, but good luck.
Yeah. No, we are done. We went back and forth, but I ended up getting my tubes removed when I had him.
By hand? Did you just kind of reach in and go hey, while you're in there, let's get rid of these, okay?
Well, when you have a planned C-section, they give you, the option if you would like to have your tubes tied or tubes removed. And so we kind of went back and forth, but we were like, no, we're definitely done. Three is a nice handful.
What was the benefit of removal over tide?
So it was, our doctor explained it. They just remove them now, I guess. I guess it's easier. I don't really know what the benefit is necessarily, but he said rather than tying them, that it was just easier to remove them.
For him or you?
I mean, it may have been him. I don't really know. I'm going to be honest, though. I don't really know the difference.
How about that? No side, there's no, you're not going to grow a mustache now or something like that? Or
No. I still have my uterus and my ovaries.
Gotcha.
So, yeah. So
I don't know. No. I don't know what all those things do. So that's why I'd ask questions. Right? I mean, I understand how to get to them and everything, but after that, I'm a little lost. Okay. So you were diagnosed at 3 years old.
I was.
Do you remember anything about growing up with type 1?
Yeah, mostly. My growing up with type 1 is very different than what my now daughter is growing up with, because I was on shots for a very long time and I didn't get a pump until I was 10 or 11 years old.
Okay. And do you remember it as oppressive or just a thing you did?
It was tough. I mean, the insulin back then was also different because I was diagnosed in 1997. So there was a lot of you have to eat this amount at this meal, and snacks have to be this amount of carbs, not as much freedom for eating as I know today, even on shots children have. So definitely that was definitely difficult.
Was that regular in MPH or was...
I'm going to be honest, I'm not exactly sure.
Remember.
Yeah, I don't remember.
You had to eat on a schedule though?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, it was probably that. Okay.
Yeah.
And then they moved you to a pump where they were probably the insulin's faster now. We're going to give you Humalog or something like that.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. So I was on, I believe it was Humalog because I got a pump in 2005. It's very interesting. The way that I got my pump, very different than today. My doctor had only prescribed one type of pump. So I'm going to be honest, up until a couple of years ago, until I started doing my own research, I didn't even know about all the different types of pumps that were out there.
Right.
I was put on a Medtronic pump and they were like, that's what everybody in our practice gets. And so they actually had me and several other kids. We had a 3-day hospital stay. So in order to get the pump, I did have to stay in the hospital for 3 days where they kind of did the initial pump training, taught my parents how to put the pump on me, how to actually do the dosing for it and calculate everything.
Right. That's interesting. It was like sleepover camp at the hospital.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It is very interesting, especially now. I mean, I'm on an Omnipod now. And I did my own pump training at home.
Yeah, I know. Right. I used a YouTube video on the internet. It was fine.
Yeah. I mean, essentially I used a little manual and watched some of the videos on their website and that was it.
Probably back then, though, there were a few people who could actually explain it to you. It was probably easier to bring patients to the information than vice versa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that's what it was. But like I said, we were all of us, there was, I think, 5 or 6 of us that all were kind of doing the pump training and getting started on the pump together. And we all had the same pump.
Okay. Yeah. Because that's the one they gave you.
That's the one they gave us.
Right.
Yeah.
And did that actually make your life? I mean, usually what people say is I didn't have to eat on a schedule anymore. And that was a big deal.
Yes. That was the biggest difference, was not having to eat on a schedule, or like not having to eat if I didn't want to eat, which was nice.
Yeah. Can you talk about that a little bit, at being a child and being told, I don't care if you're hungry or not, you're eating right now?
I mean, it was definitely very difficult. It made me, like, as a child, I mean, not want to eat. I mean, the typical, kid wanting control. It made me, not interested in eating. There was probably some bribery on my parents' part, because they needed to make sure, if they'd already given me the insulin, they needed to make sure that I ate it.
Right.
I know that was definitely probably hard for them too, especially now that I'm a parent of a type 1.
Yeah, I was going to say, now you understand it from both sides, right?
Yes.
Are your parents
definitely
alive?
Yes, they are.
They are. Do you know, was it difficult for your mom specifically, or dad, that your child got type 1? If you take insulin or sulfonylureas, you are at risk for your blood sugar going too low. You need a safety net when it matters most. Be ready with Gvoke HypoPen. My daughter carries Gvoke HypoPen everywhere she goes, because it's a ready-to-use rescue pen for treating very low blood sugar in people with diabetes ages 2 and above that I trust. Low blood sugar emergencies can happen unexpectedly, and they demand quick action. Luckily, Gvoke HypoPen can be administered in 2 simple steps, even by yourself in certain situations. Show those around you where you store Gvoke HypoPen and how to use it. They need to know how to use Gvoke HypoPen before an emergency situation happens. Learn more about why Gvoke HypoPen is in Arden's Diabetes Toolkit at gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. Gvoke shouldn't be used if you have a tumor in the gland on the top of your kidneys called a pheochromocytoma, or if you have a tumor in your pancreas called an insulinoma. Visit gvokeglucagon.com/risk for safety information. You can manage diabetes confidently with the powerfully simple Dexcom G7. Dexcom.com/juicebox. The Dexcom G7 is the CGM that my daughter is wearing. The G7 is a simple CGM system that delivers real-time glucose numbers to your smartphone or smartwatch. The G7 is made for all types of diabetes, type 1 and type 2, but also people experiencing gestational diabetes. The Dexcom G7 can help you spend more time in range, which is proven to lower A1C. The more time you spend in range, the better and healthier you feel. And with the Dexcom Clarity app, you can track your glucose trends, and the app will also provide you with a projected A1C in as little as 2 weeks. If you're looking for clarity around your diabetes, you're looking for Dexcom. Dexcom.com/juicebox. When you use my link, you're supporting the podcast. Dexcom.com/juicebox. Head over there now.
I think for both of them, it was definitely very difficult, and even now, we all have those moments, where I feel like, oh, I can't believe this. I'm, super frustrated, or, something feels not fair. My mom definitely is the one that I talk to, because she, as a mom, also understands that feeling.
How many kids did your mom have?
Just me.
Just you. Okay. Oh, yeah. Then she's probably, I'm trying to imagine 10 years from now, Arden telling me that her 3-year-old has diabetes,
Yeah. And definitely, I mean, when she was actually diagnosed, the morning of, I called my mom in a panic, because I also have a 12-year-old. We knew we were going to take her to the hospital, obviously, but I needed somebody to come take my older daughter.
Yeah.
And definitely that was a hard phone call to make. I'm going to be honest, I don't remember what I even said to her, because in that moment, I feel like we went into survival mode of we have to get to the hospital.
How did you figure out that the hospital was necessary?
My daughter had been soaking through diapers, overnight, because she, like I said, she was less than a year old. She'd been soaking through diapers overnight, like waking up frequently, which was unusual, because at that point, she was almost a year old. She had not been waking up during the night frequently before that, but she started waking up, was super fussy during the night. I figured maybe she's going through a growth spurt. Again, she's peeing through diapers. So we sized up in the diapers thinking like, oh, maybe the diaper's too small. And, it's just, she's not able to hold everything. She was diagnosed on a Saturday. That Friday, I went to pick her up from my mom's house because my parents watch her when she's not at preschool. And she was very thirsty, very fussy. She had kind of been getting sick on and off. So I thought maybe she's getting sick again. I don't know. She came over to me and I hugged her and I like smelled her breath. I know a lot of people say they smell a sweet smell. I didn't smell a sweet smell. I almost smelled like acetone.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Some people smell it as sweet and some people smell it that way. It's the ketones, right? So
yes. Yeah. So I said to my mom, I was like, do you smell something on her breath? Like, do you smell that? And she was like, no, I don't smell anything. And I had been worrying, obviously, as she would be, getting thirstier and thirstier. I'd been worrying, and her one year appointment was coming up and I was going to bring it up to her doctor, but I didn't truly think at that age, that would actually be possible.
Even though you were 3?
Yeah. I mean, I figured if she was diagnosed that maybe we would have more time before she was diagnosed, maybe.
Was that hopeful or?
I think it was hopeful that wouldn't be the case.
I see. Because
I definitely had a feeling. And so we went home, that night she was still super fussy. And when she woke up in the morning, she had peed through her diaper and was, her whole bed was wet. Like I looked at her face and like, now, of course, looking back, I know they say hindsight is 20/20. Like looking back, when I looked at pictures of her face, like her eyes almost looked like sunken in.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how I didn't like see it in that moment. But my husband had left with our older daughter because it was her, almost her first birthday. We were doing a little smash cake at home. I had my husband go get the cake that I had ordered from the store. While he was gone, she was thirsty. So I gave her a cup of water. She downed the whole cup of water in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And she was just crying, like very fussy. And I was like, this is very unusual. And so when he got home, I was like, I have to just take her blood. Like, I'm probably wrong. I'm probably being ridiculous, but I will just feel better if I just take it and make sure that I'm, being ridiculous.
Right.
And we took it. We went into our room and took it, and it was over 500.
Mm. So then that's the moment
we knew.
You call your mom and you're like, I've got to go to the hospital and all this is happening.
Yes.
But it happened. Yeah. So the onset was pretty quick though, right? As far as length of time?
I have to say, yeah. I mean, it felt like it was, we had COVID back in December before she was diagnosed. And I feel like kind of that whole like 30 to 40 days after was when we started seeing like diapers being soaked through, getting fussier, waking up during the night. And then she did have days where she was like super duper hungry. And then other days where she didn't want to eat anything.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's about how it goes. So, and then uneventful, or did they do the thing where you have diabetes, so I don't have to teach you anything? So when we live in a small town. I did not think about the fact that our small town does not actually have a children's hospital attached to the regular hospital. Yeah.
I think because again, when I saw that 500 number, like I just panicked and, we went straight to our local hospital. And I walked in and I said to the woman at the desk, I was like, she asked why we're here. And I said, my daughter has diabetes. And they were like, okay, she has diabetes. And I was like, no, she's going to be diagnosed with diabetes. I know she has diabetes. And they were like, how can you know that? And I was like, because I took her blood at home and it was over 500.
Yeah.
And very quickly we were brought back, to a triage room.
We had the same exact confusion.
What, that you went to the emergency room?
We went in the ER, went up to the person at the desk and they said, hey, why are you here? And we said, our daughter has diabetes. And then they stare at you because you don't think about it like from the perspective of people who have diabetes who also end up in the emergency room.
No.
And then there's that pause where everybody's mind works for a second. And then one of us goes, oh, no, sorry, we're diagnosing her right now with type 1.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's exactly what happened to us.
And they kind of were like, oh, well, it could be something else. And I'm like, no, I have type 1 and her blood sugar was over 500. It's not anything else.
Yeah. That's
like,
good.
I know it's not.
Well, it's good because it saves time and it also keeps them from tripping down other roads, which you hear people's stories all the time that happens, It's excellent.
Especially of like sickness, the flu.
Yeah. It might be this. Let's check this first. And you're like, can you just check their blood sugar?
And that's the thing. So when we actually got back to the room, they were like, well, we need to check for all these other things. And I'm like, you can check for whatever you want, but it's diabetes. Like, right. I know what it is. She's probably in DKA.
Yeah. Yeah. Stop looking around. It's right here in front of us.
Yes.
It's so
And
interesting.
so,
We have protocols.
Yes,
Well, have you been listening to the Cold Wind episodes?
I have been. Yes.
Yeah, well, then you know what's going on.
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
And like, truly, I'm not surprised about some of the things that I hear on those episodes, unfortunately.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
I mean, like I said, we went back and they were like, well, we have to test for all these other things too. And I was like, you can test for whatever you want, but it's diabetes. And she needs an IV. Like
Right.
we need to get moving.
She's little. Let's go. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. She was less than a year old. She was 20 pounds.
Right. Check her blood gases at least before you start talking about other things, you know.
Well, the problem was in our local hospital, because they do not have a children's hospital. They really are not trained well with pediatrics.
Mm-hmm.
So they could not get an IV in her to get fluids in her or get anything started.
Did they move her then?
She ended up taking a helicopter to our children's hospital that's about an hour away. The problem is, though, is like to get that started. I mean, we were in the local emergency room for probably about 5 hours by the time that they were actually able to get the crew to our hospital and back to the other hospital.
You live in Mayberry or something? What's going on?
We live in a very small town in North Carolina.
Gotcha. Pretty far from other things.
Yeah. I mean, we're about a couple hours from some of the bigger cities.
I see.
So unfortunately, like I said, if I like now knowing what I know now, like whenever we have to go to the emergency room with any of our kids, we don't go to our local one. We go to the one with the children's hospital.
Yeah, because Alyssa, had to sober up the crop duster pilot to get him into the helicopter, and that probably took hours to coffee and water, walking him around and everything. You know?
My husband and I, though, we were super frustrated because we were like, listen, I understand it's very difficult to get an IV in her. She's really dehydrated. We know, but somebody has to be able to do this.
Is there no one here that can do it?
I mean, there were several people that tried. They tried 7 times to get an IV in her arm.
Oh my God. I wonder what else they can't.
Her leg.
Yeah. I wonder what else they can't do. That's what I would be wondering.
Actually, so the only people that were able to actually get the IV in, and this was the only IV that stayed in like throughout her whole hospital stay, even at the children's hospital, was the flight crew. When they got there, they saw she didn't have any IV, and they were like, we can't take her up without any IV in her.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were able to get one in her foot. That was the only place that they were able to actually keep one in.
So not an undoable thing, just you needed the right person to do it.
Yes. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, how much was that helicopter ride, by the way?
That was a whole nother thing. So obviously after everything was said and done, we were back at home. We had gotten a letter from insurance that they didn't want to cover.
Here we go.
The flight. And I was like, oh my God, what do you mean you don't want to cover it? And I was like, I know my insurance does cover air ambulance. So in the end, we paid a small deductible. It wasn't terrible.
It wasn't $25,000 or anything like that.
No, our portion ended up being about $200.
What did they want from you?
It was well over $2,000.
Oh, $2,000? That's not bad.
Yeah.
Well, I guess though they did the crops at the same time they were going to the hospital, so it's probably like a ride share almost, right?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. I mean, what the original bill, I guess, that they were going to send us was $2,000. I'm sure what insurance was willing to originally cover was probably more than that. Mm-hmm. But what our end was going to be was about $2,000. We were like, no, I don't think that's, because I actually had to look more into my insurance policy after that, like as to how much is actually covered.
Well, now I'm wondering how they price these things, because there have been people on here that were charged tens of thousands of dollars for life flights.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, that it could have been more the bill that I had gotten.
The one that finally got to you. Yeah.
Yeah. By the time it got to me, would have been about $2,000.
Gotcha. Jeez.
Which is not what we ended up paying.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
I don't know how much it was before insurance. I'm going to be honest. I don't remember.
Yeah. A lot, I bet.
Probably.
I like how people are like, it's all worth it. I'm like, oh, that's a lot of money.
Well, and so it was taking so long to get the air ambulance that I was like, what if we just like take a regular ambulance? It's an hour away.
Yeah.
Like the time that we've spent waiting here. And they were like, well, if something happens on the road. And I was like, but
what if something happens here? You people are inept.
But that's the thing. I'm like, what if something happens here? Nobody can get an IV in her.
Yeah. Why don't we just take one of your inept nurses and put them in the Winnebago and we'll head over? Like, I mean, that's very interesting.
Yes. And I'm like, I at this point, I'd almost prefer a regular ambulance because at least we'll get there.
We're moving.
Yes. Yeah. There's nothing more irritating to me than staying stagnant. So I can't just sit here. That's
really something. Okay, so we get the diagnosis. We go to the hospital. She's obviously okay because she's home and she's doing well.
Yes.
I want to kind of fast forward a little bit to the juxtaposition between what you were accustomed to growing up, what you know now as an adult, and then what you learned, subsequently from this. So we know what it was like for you growing up a little bit. We know you got a pump around 10, but was a pump just a way not to use shots, or were you being thoughtful about it? What were your A1Cs through your 20s, and where are you now?
As a child, I was very frustrated with the shots, and I was done with them. So definitely the pump was a way to not have to take shots anymore, and to have more control over like what I could eat, what I did or didn't have to eat. That was kind of what it was for as a teenager and as a young adult. Definitely like what I know now, very different, because my control with a pump is so much better than it could have ever been with taking shots.
Okay.
I'm going to be honest, I don't know what my A1Cs were as a child. They were probably in the lower 7s as a child, but now as an adult, especially now as an adult who's had several children, my A1Cs are now sitting in the 5s with a pump.
Oh, wow. That's great. That's with Omnipod?
Yes. Yeah. So I was on a Medtronic up until my daughter's diagnosis. I had actually inquired with my endocrinologist about an Omnipod because, again, I didn't really know much about other pumps. I didn't know about other pump types because I'd been on a Medtronic, for most of the time that I was on a pump.
Yeah.
I didn't mind the tubing, of course, because to me it was still better than shots. I definitely was interested in Omnipod because they were tubeless. And so I inquired with my endocrinologist, and I ended up right before she was diagnosed, like 2 weeks before maybe, getting like the kit that comes with the PDM and like the 1-month sample.
Right.
And of course it came, and I was like, I don't know why this is coming. I didn't really, I just thought about maybe looking into it. I don't know that I really want to switch. I don't know that I'm ready, mainly because I think I was worried about changing to something new.
Yeah.
And right before, actually the night before, 2 nights before she was diagnosed, that's when I put on the first Omnipod and like actually programmed it and tried it.
Wow.
And yeah, and it was great. I definitely loved having no tubes. Like that was the biggest positive of changing from Medtronic to an Omnipod. Once my daughter was diagnosed, I ended up going back to my Medtronic for a short time.
Because you knew it well and you felt overwhelmed?
No, because when we were in the hospital, when she was diagnosed, when we were actually in the children's hospital, she was in the PICU to start. And then when we were moved to the pediatric floor, the morning that we were going to get discharged, we had been giving her shots, but her blood sugars were still, in the 300s and 400s, even with shots, because she was so small and her doses were so small. But an insulin pen can't get doses as small as someone that tiny would need.
Right.
So she would be eating a meal and not getting any insulin for it because she wasn't eating enough carbs to technically get insulin for it.
Yeah.
And so that morning I woke up and my parents, they live pretty close to us. I called my dad and I was like, I need you to go to my house and I need you to get my Medtronic supplies. I need you to get all the stuff. And he had helped me with the Medtronic pump as a child. So he knew exactly, which supplies I'd need. And he's like, why do you want your pump and all that other stuff? And I was like, because I need to put the tubeless pump on Jillian. She needs to be on a pump. She can't be on shots. She's too small. The doses, I can't make the doses small enough and she won't eat enough.
So you gave her and they let you do that? That all was okay?
So, no.
I was going to say, that doesn't sound right, but go ahead.
No. So that morning, they were giving her long acting in the morning when she first would get up right before breakfast or right after breakfast. And that morning we woke up and I was like, you're not giving her long acting. My dad, is on his way. He's bringing me my tubed pump. I'm going to take off this pump right now. We're going to change the settings in the PDM and make it so that it's applicable for her. And they were like, well, you can do that when you go home. And I was like, no, I'm not doing it when we go home. And if you give her that long acting insulin, I can't do this until tomorrow. Because that long-acting insulin is supposed to act for 24 hours.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm not waiting until tomorrow. I'm not giving her shots for the rest of the day today. We're going to put a pump on her. That's not, that's not hospital policy, not protocol. And I said, I don't care.
That's very good. And you got it done?
Yeah. I mean, there was a lot of pushback because they were like, once you do that, none of the nurses will come near her. They will not touch anything with the pump. I was like, that's fine. I don't want them to.
Oh, different, scary.
Yes.
Different.
Yes. I mean, they were like, we don't, the staff here doesn't know how all the different pumps work. I was like, that's fine. I know how this works.
Yeah.
So
I got Google. I'm all good. Thanks.
Like, no, don't get me wrong. Like, she's tiny and her doses obviously were much smaller than mine.
Right.
So I needed help as far as making sure that I'm programming it correctly and making sure that I have the correct basal rates in.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as like being able to give her insulin or being able to calculate carbs, like that's nothing new for me.
Yeah.
So that's fine if they don't want to touch it. And we were going to be discharged that afternoon anyway.
Right.
So I was like, no. And we waited and, my dad got there and they were pushing back because, we'd passed the mark from the day before when she'd gotten her long acting insulin. So they were like, if we keep waiting, her blood sugars are going to go up. I'm like, I understand that. We're going to put the pump on her. You are not giving her that shot.
Yeah. Nice. Your dad got there, you put it on, and she's been wearing one ever since?
Ever since. Yep.
Do you recall what her starting basal rates were?
I think we started off as just like, it was either 0.05 or 0.1 per hour. We might have done alternating.
Mm-hmm.
She was on like an extremely small amount. I mean, she was also much smaller then than she was now. She was on an extremely small amount at the beginning. And we kind of just started her at as basic of a level as possible to figure out where we needed to go from there.
Yeah.
And her endocrinologist, is wonderful. She was in the hospital that day. And in the middle of this back and forth with, you can't put a pump on her here. No, yes, I'm going to. I definitely yelled at her endocrinologist and later apologized.
Why'd you apologize?
Because I probably should not have yelled at someone. But in that moment, like, I felt like I was not being listened to. So I felt I needed to yell.
I hear you. Well, nice of you to apologize. And they weren't listening to you either. Is that right?
No, but my daughter's endocrinologist, actually, she has her own children with diabetes. So she was like, you don't need to apologize to me. Like, I understand.
Nice.
I understand why.
Oh, that's really lovely, actually. That's wonderful.
Yeah. Her endocrinologist, she's been her endocrinologist since that day. And we love her.
How do you know about me?
So after my daughter was diagnosed, I did join a couple of groups on Facebook of, moms and dads of kids with type 1. And I had been seeing the Juicebox podcast come up a bunch of times. I saw it, tagged a couple of times. I think I'd posted about my daughter once or twice, and somebody had put that recommendation in there. I ended up taking some time off of work after she was diagnosed to kind of get a hold of everything that was going on in our lives. And while I was home with her, I ended up starting to listen to the podcast. When we were in the hospital, and obviously the days after, her numbers were very up and down, definitely running a lot higher than even I was comfortable with as a type 1. And, they kind of said like, oh, she'll run higher. It's okay if she runs, at 200 or above 200. Having, been pregnant with her, a year before, obviously I hear 200 and I'm like, oh my God, that's so high.
Right.
I what do you mean? It's okay if she runs, her target was 250. I'm like, what do you mean her target's 250? That's so high. How can that be? I was definitely afraid because of, the education, of course, that we still did get some education in the hospital. I was, afraid of giving her too much insulin because I did not want her to go low or go too low. And so I started listening to some of the very earlier episodes, Bold with Insulin, things like that. And I started listening to some of the things that you were saying. And I was like, well, this makes sense. Why would I want her to run higher? I wouldn't want that for myself. So just because she's a child, it doesn't mean that she should be running high.
Did they ever tell you why they set the targets that high?
No, I have a feeling personally that it has to do with, if you do have somebody who does not have any background knowledge, I understand in the beginning, maybe it's safer to run higher so that you're not overdosing on insulin. As someone who does have background knowledge on how insulin works, I definitely felt it was way too high.
Was there any honeymoon for her at all?
Slightly, like she definitely needed a lot less insulin during the first 6 months to a year.
Okay. But no like wild swings, like need a bunch, don't need it. Like didn't go back and forth. Oh, that's nice, actually.
No. And that's the thing. Like I know that they did talk to us in the hospital. They're like, well, she could go through a honeymoon. And it is kind of nice when she does, because then she won't need as much insulin. And I'm like, I don't feel that's nice, because then I'm going to be giving her, a normal amount of insulin, or what I think is a normal amount of insulin. If she's still producing some insulin, it's going to be way too much.
There's no indicator light on your forehead that says not so much today. Yeah.
No. So,
right.
I mean, I know that a honeymoon period, I guess, can be good because you don't have to take as much insulin, but you don't know it until after you've already given it.
Until you've taken too much insulin.
Yes.
And you're trying to get a 2-year-old to eat.
Yes. And honestly, that was even now has been our biggest challenge is like making sure that she eats to cover what we've already given her.
Yeah. Did you breastfeed?
I did not.
Okay. So that wasn't an issue with it.
No, but she, at the time, she was still, like I said, it was 3 days before her first birthday. She was still drinking from a bottle and she still had formula.
Yeah.
Calculating those carbs are kind of complicated.
Yeah, no, I know. They when people talk about trying to calculate for breast milk, it sounds like they're going crazy while they're talking about it. And, there's no way to know how much
I cannot imagine trying to calculate the carbs because it was hard enough on formula where, we looked up the nutrition facts, but the way formula reacted in her body and the way it was absorbed in the body was not necessarily even the same as regular milk.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. And we did see a difference when we switched because obviously soon after she turned 1, we started switching to whole milk, but we did see a difference, but the formula, the way it would spike her blood sugar was kind of crazy.
Right. Yeah. Oh, I hear you. But you made it. Do you feel like you made it through that? Do you feel like that part's over now?
Yeah. I definitely feel like, those honestly, like the first 6 months probably were the hardest.
Okay.
Even being on a pump definitely made it easier because, it was much easier to make changes, to see things as they were happening.
Yeah.
Definitely those first 6 months were very difficult because, she was so little. She didn't necessarily understand the pump changes, taking off the pump. She, getting poked all the time.
Right. You wear a CGM or no?
Yes, I do.
And did you put one on her?
Yes. So when she was helicopter lifted to the children's hospital, we were not allowed to go with her. We had to drive separately because I guess it's insurance on their part. They had 2 nurses and her and the person who was flying the helicopter, that were in the actual helicopter with her. And we had to drive, the hour to the children's hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And while we were on the drive on the way up there, I went online and started filling out the forms on Omnipod's website as well as Dexcom's website to get the ball rolling with being able to get those devices for her.
Yeah, that's different when you understand what you're talking about, huh?
Yeah. And of course, I saw on there, it says approved for ages 2 and up. And I was like, well, she's not even 1. Like, I don't even know if they're going to let me do this.
Right.
But, and again, in that moment, I looked at my husband and I was like, if they say that, she can't have it because she's not 2 and she has to be on shots for the next year, I'll just put my pump on her and I'll take shots.
And you were going to do the shots.
Of course. Yeah. I definitely would.
Yeah.
And I don't like shots, but I would rather myself take shots than my child.
I understand. That's lovely too. I think that people don't understand that, it says, for 2 and above, but that just means they FDA tested it for 2 and above. And then your doctor just writes it off label and mostly that's okay. And
yeah. And so when we were in the PICU the following morning, one of the endocrinologists had come in and she had talked to us, about if we wanted to try a pump. And I was like, I already filled out the information on Omnipod. And she was like, oh, well, we were thinking maybe one of the tubed pumps instead, because those can get, even smaller doses. And I was like, she's a year old. I really don't want her to have tubes. She's an active 1-year-old. A tube really would not be productive for her. She would end up pulling it out or ripping it out accidentally, rolling over.
We were thinking that. You're like, oh, is that what you were thinking?
Yeah.
Here's what I was thinking in the car on the way over here. Already took care of it. Thank you, though.
Yes, and that's the thing. She was she was shocked that we had already filled out everything. I was just like, I didn't have a doctor's name to put on. I was like, obviously, I put my information on there. I didn't have a doctor's name, at the time, because when we were traveling to the children's hospital, I had no idea who the doctors were. But I was like, as soon as I get the information from them, I'll forward it to you because I want this prescription put in as soon as possible.
Well, and it happened, huh?
It did. She ended up getting a Dexcom because that was a Saturday. I think we had a Dexcom on her by the following Thursday or Friday. We got the Dexcom pretty quickly.
It's awesome, actually.
By the end of that week. Yeah.
Now I'm excited when people find technology and information early on because it makes a big difference. Yeah, it's an easier path and it's a healthier path and really wonderful.
Well, that's the thing. We knew, her A1C at diagnosis was a 9.1, which compared to some other stories that I hear, it's not as high as I guess it could have been.
Right. Yeah, it sounds like you got it pretty quickly.
Yeah, but I think she was in DKA, so maybe because she was so little.
It happened quickly.
It did. Yeah, I think so. And, we did get her A1C down pretty quickly with the pump.
beautiful. What did you learn or maybe you didn't, but like, has her diagnosis changed anything about how you take care of yourself?
I feel like it reminds me that even when I am not pregnant, I need to make sure that I am taking care of myself as well. Obviously, before I got pregnant with her, and then while I was pregnant with her, and then while I was pregnant with my son, definitely had like the best control because I knew how important it was. But even on, in between having children or even now postpartum, like definitely a priority to make sure that my numbers stay in range as well.
I'm doing a little math here. You were young when you had your first, right?
So my first daughter is actually adopted.
Oh.
She is biologically my husband's daughter, and I adopted her in 2020.
Oh, I see. So you've given birth to a 3-year-old and a 6-month-old.
Yes.
12-year-old.
6-week old.
Oh, 6 week. Jeez.
Yeah.
My brain doesn't work in those small numbers like that. All I know is I see a 12, a 3, and a 6 written in front of me in descending order. And my brain's like, why is the 6 not above the 3? So she's not yours biologically.
Biologically. No.
Got it.
No. So, no. So my husband and I, when we started dating, she was just under 2 years old. And so once we were able to, we got the adoption process started. Unfortunately, COVID pushed the adoption process back a little bit. But
my point is that you lived for 24 years before being pregnant with diabetes.
Yes.
And you don't remember when you were younger, that's fine. But what was your management like, and where were your numbers?
Young adult.
Yeah, young adult and etc.
So definitely when I was in college, I did not pay attention to diabetes the way that I pay attention to it now. I definitely did not make it a priority. Even when I first got married to my husband, did not make it a huge priority. I don't really have a reason why, other than it had always been a part of me. And I was just kind of like, oh, this is another thing to have to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely, once we got married and especially once we started talking about possibly having children in the next few years, that's when I was like, okay, we really need, I really need to have better control. I was not on a CGM for a long time. And once I got on a CGM, that kind of made the huge difference for me in my control.
What changes? So yes, you have a CGM and that helps, but more like daily steps, attitude, like what kind of stuff shifts there when you go from I'm just going to do this because it's a thing I do to I need to do it really well?
I definitely think the conversation about wanting to have kids, definitely the way that I looked at numbers, the way that I looked at food and started doing things like pre-bolusing. I had not really done that much as a young adult. Mm-hmm. But once I knew, that I wanted to have children, and I knew the type of control that I had to have in order to have children, that's when I realized, okay, even if I don't really want a CGM because I didn't want another device on my body, I have to have that device on my body because I have no idea what's going on in between meals. I wasn't really taking my blood in between meals.
Yeah. So you understand that it's necessary to be pregnant. Did you also understand it was necessary for your good health, but just ignored that part of it?
Kind of, yeah. And especially as a young adult, I didn't really think too far into how's this going to look 30 years from now for me.
So knowing that was your reaction, is that something you're already thinking about for the baby?
What do you mean?
For your 3-year-old, do you wonder if that's going to be her attitude when she gets older? And how do you work with that?
I do sometimes. And I definitely, my husband and I both try to keep positivity as far as, especially when she's not interested, she doesn't want her blood sugar taken, or she doesn't want to do a pump site change, things like that. We talk a lot about being healthy, not necessarily I want her to know the way we're trying to keep her healthy now is something that I want her to carry into, when she's a teenager, young adulthood, for her overall health.
Yeah. I think that's really valuable, actually, just to keep that message up. This is what we do because this is what we want. This is why we want this.
Yes.
This is what we do, and then just over and over again until hopefully it becomes part of her.
I hope so. She definitely, even at 3, she definitely is not happy about pump site changes and Dexcom changes, but she's started becoming more involved in them. Like when I change my pump, I have her help me. When it's time for her to take her old pump off, because that's the part that she doesn't like, we have her help pull it off and take the patch off with her.
Yeah. It's all you can do. It's very slow. It's a very, very slow process. So, yeah. And how about you? Are you using an algorithm?
So she and I are both now on Omnipod 5. I have not been using the algorithm mainly because while I was pregnant, it didn't get me in as tight of control as I needed to be.
Right.
And so being postpartum now, I'm also not using auto mode just because postpartum is definitely very difficult on blood sugars.
Yeah.
I was taking a lot of insulin by the end of my pregnancy.
Right.
And so using auto mode until I get my manual settings correct, to me does not feel very beneficial.
Mm-hmm. So are you very sensitive right now, or do you need more?
So right after I gave birth to my son, definitely very sensitive those first 2 to 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm seeing over the last 2 weeks or so that I'm needing more insulin here and there, like for food.
Heading back to where you were before pregnancy.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, so do you imagine you'll go into auto mode?
I would. Yeah, I definitely would like to because my daughter is in auto mode most of the time and it really does work very well for her. So I know eventually that I would like to. I just, like I said, I want to get those settings correct before I switch to that.
Reasonably stable too.
Yes.
Back to normal, I guess.
Yes.
But for her, you like it a lot.
Oh, we love it. Like I said, we started on the Dash back when she was diagnosed because the 5 wasn't out yet.
Yeah.
And I got the 5 the summer after she was diagnosed. So it was 2022. And I started in auto mode. I really liked auto mode back when I was using it. And I knew that I really wanted her, but I believe it was that she wasn't using enough insulin maybe when it first came out, that she wasn't able to get it right away. By the time we got to late 2022 or any little bit of honeymoon that we had was kind of on the downward trend. So she was using more insulin and we were able to get the 5 for her. And honestly, the 5 made the biggest difference in getting her A1C down and her time in range greater during the day.
It's excellent. Oh, I'm glad. The reason I asked, and because the way we're talking about it is I just got back from visiting Arden on her spring break. Mm-hmm. And we were with her for a week, actually, probably a solid 7 days. And she's doing so well, but there's just no doubt that the combination of an insulin pump, a CGM, and an algorithm is a big part of why she's doing well.
Yes.
Because of every time that you do that thing where you guess carbs and don't get them quite right, or you get, really active and don't think about it, or all the stuff that happens that, if you stop and if you're listening to the Pro Tip series, you're like, well, if you're going to exercise an hour and a half before you want to turn your basal down, like that, you're not really doing those things. That's how you do it, but you're not doing it once you go, when you're living it. And the algorithm just saves you over and over again. It's constantly working on your behalf and trying so hard to keep you from being high and from being low. Arden's going to come through college having a slightly higher A1C while she's there than she would at home. But I mean, she's going to have a low 6 A1C eating college, eating at college.
Eating college food.
Yeah, doing her thing there, cooking for herself sometimes, but then for 3 days in a row, just during her finals, I think she DoorDashed during her finals 5 days in a row. And, that stuff's all happening. And she's going to come out of college with a 6.2 probably this year. I think that
That's great.
Yeah, her first year as a freshman, she swung a 6.4 while she was by herself. And then she comes home and it goes down just when, the food gets better and get some stability to your day. Right. And then this time she went back and it's a little lower. In fairness, she's taking a GLP medication now too. So she's using less insulin. Her hunger is not exactly the same because of the GLP. So there are other impactors. But at the same time, who cares? It's helping her, and
it's helping her.
Yeah, it's amazing. And your kids, she's 3, so 15 years from now, I'm hoping it. The Omnipod 5 algorithm and whatever else exists is better and better, and hopefully the sensing technology is better and allows the algorithms to be more aggressive, and that's what we're hoping for because.
That's what I hope too.
Yeah, of course, because that part, I'm talking to you, you're a reasonable person. Do you know what I mean? You're intelligent and thoughtful and reasonable. And when I say to you, did you take good care of yourself? You're I
mean,
mostly.
And that's the thing is I did not think about the overall impact it would have later in life.
Right.
Thankfully, I mean, I've had diabetes for 27 years. I've not had any complications and I'm very thankful for that.
Of course.
But I'm hoping that, my daughter who's had an even lower A1C than I ever had, as a young child. I'm hoping that she also, gets to 30 years, 40 years, 50 years of diabetes and does not have any complications either.
Yeah, enjoys benefits of that management style.
Exactly.
Yeah. And hopefully, who knows? I mean, look, there's no way to know what comes in the future, right? But,
no.
So we don't usually think about things as quickly as they're happening, which is why you hear people say like, oh, I don't want an older doctor because he's doing it like 15 years ago or that kind of thing. But, you're regular in MPH growing up, then you go to Humalog and Lantus probably, I'm guessing, right? And then,
probably.
On a pump just because it avoids shots. Takes a guy on a podcast to be like, hey, have you thought about like timing your insulin like this and doing these things? And like, so all that takes a lot of time. But now things are speeding up so quickly. Like, right, like with AI. I was listening to this guy be interviewed the other day and forget what was he talking about? Energy, maybe like electricity and like he's like in 10 years we're going to be powered by electricity, like by the sun and by solar and like batteries. And I'm like, how so fast? Like that was my question when he was in the interview. And I don't know if this will really happen or not, Alyssa. That's not the point. The point is that he's like, that's the point. And he started talking about computers training computers and how much more quickly that will make us get to something. And then, almost as a throwaway in the conversation, he said, and that's going to happen in medicine too.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
Oh, I'm like, I hear it. Like, okay, so right now you come out of grad school with like this harebrained idea about how a cell works, and you're going to dedicate your entire life to figuring that out. Now you're just going to point the AI at it. And it's going to run simulations and they're going to crash and it's going to weed them down. And you're going to take a lifetime's worth of work and squeeze it into, I don't know how long, a year, a weekend. Like, I don't know how quickly it's going to work. Like, what is going to happen to healthcare in the next decade? And then how will that translate to diabetes?
I mean, I hope so. I hope it does.
Super exciting, actually. Like,
it's definitely, I mean, the improvements that I've seen, since I was a child, definitely.
Right.
I can only imagine.
How lovely would it be, Alyssa, if none of you had type 1 diabetes when the machines took over and killed us all? Wouldn't that be nice? At least I don't have type 1. And that thing steps on your head. I mean, I'm going over Terminator. I don't know exactly like how it'll go down. But, honestly, I think it's amazing. I've brought it up on the podcast a couple of times, but I read this news story once about how Tesla, the car people, like they're teaching their cars to drive, right? Mm-hmm. And they couldn't find computers that were fast enough to crunch all the data that they were getting back from the cars. So they built their own supercomputer to do it. And I was like, right on. I don't know if I even care about that or not, but let's go. You know what I mean? Like they were like, these computers we have right now are not fast enough to take the data and do this with it. We'll actually design a faster computer. And I was like, yes, I want more of that. I want more people thinking that way. You know what I mean? So
that will translate to healthcare.
It'll translate to everything because, then suddenly a research hospital will be using computers. Like there could be a world where none of us work one day and it's okay. Like where you get up and just like feed your mind and your soul and, you live your life because things are taking care of things. And I might like that. I have to tell you. I had a week off and it was pretty goddamn relaxing. So,
yeah, and you don't take a lot of weeks off, do you?
I really don't. I jumped back on with Jenny yesterday. We recorded an Ask Scott and Jenny episode like the day after I got home. And I said to her, I'm like, well, let's see if I remember anything about diabetes. Like, because, I was sleeping a little later in the morning, getting up, walking around. It was warm outside. I did have a bit of a problem, Alyssa, where I don't want to say what happened, but I had some money stolen out of my hotel room. And
oh my gosh.
That was unpleasant, but I let that go. I was like, I don't care.
You're like, I'm so relaxed. It's okay.
I'm just going to let this go. We actually had a really movie-like moment this week. My wife accepted another position at a different company. And we were sitting at a rooftop restaurant in a hotel on like a warm southern day when my wife got a phone call and got this job offer and she accepted it. And I was like, this is the most cosmopolitan thing that has ever happened to us. Because if we weren't here, this would have happened in our kitchen. So, but instead we're like, sitting at a glass table with these big heavy chairs, and there's an umbrella and it's sunny, and my wife's on the phone like, hello, and I'm like, oh my God, this is like Anne Hathaway should be in this scene, like
like a scene out of the movie.
I swear to you, I was like, makes it so much more exciting like this. Anyway, congratulations to my wife, who will have accepted this job 6 months ago when you hear
That's
this.
Amazing.
Yeah, she's very excited. Yeah, I think that things move the way they moved. Like, you can see it in our lifetime, right?
Yeah.
Like I can see it in your story, or when I talk to somebody who's 50 years with diabetes, talk to Jenny, and you can see the pros and the cons. I don't know what good or bad is going to come of all this, right? Using Jenny as an example, I think Jenny's a very healthy eater because I think that's how her parents were inclined, right? But B, because she got put on that insulin where she needed to eat at every certain times. So she's a very a regimented eater because of that. Now, I've also talked to people who will be like, I have an eating disorder because they put me on this regimented plan. And so it's a lot of personality too, right? Like a lot of this stuff.
It definitely is.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff you can't really do anything about.
That side of it, the eating disorders and stuff, definitely a reason that we are very careful about how we frame eating food and what needs to be eaten versus what you want to eat.
Yeah.
With all of our children, really. I mean,
no, of course. Yeah,
not just Jillian, but all of our kids.
Yeah, you don't know which person they are when they're that little.
No.
So there's a lot of care that goes into that, the way you disseminate information and talk about things, the words you use, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing there, I can't remember which episode it was, but I know there was one episode when you talked about pre-bolusing for Arden, and you talked about giving a certain amount of insulin that, if she didn't eat anything, you would give her a juice box.
Mm-hmm.
That's definitely the mentality that my husband and I have. We pre-bolus, only 10 to 15 carbs, which she may eat that. She may eat more than that.
Right.
But at her age, we're not exactly sure. There are some days where she sits down and she wants to eat everything on the plate. And there are other days where she's like, I don't want any of this. I want to go play.
Yeah.
But as long as we're within 10 to 15 carbs of pre-bolus, we know we can cover it with a juice rather than forcing her to eat something she doesn't want to eat.
Isn't it awesome to think that a little girl in North Carolina is doing a thing that I thought of 15 years ago in a gymnasium in New Jersey?
Yeah. I mean, because it has made the biggest difference for her.
Yeah, I'm glad. I'm going to be mushy this week making the podcast because I didn't talk to anybody last week. So all my emotional stuff didn't get to come out. So I'm going to have that going on. I'll probably cry in the next 48 hours making this podcast for freaking sure. Because I spent the last week defending myself against my family. Because also the loss of that money was probably my fault. Listen, I took I don't know how you would put it down there, but I took a lot of hot pokers to the ass over that for my family. They're like, oh, look what you did. I'm like, yeah, okay, I got it.
Yep.
Just to hear you say that, this little thing, this thing you heard on a podcast that I said, even, I don't know, God, Arden's.
I was going to say it was a very old episode. I don't know which episode it was.
Arden's 20 in a couple of months. I did this when she was I don't know, 6 or 7. So maybe 13 years ago. And then I talked about it on the podcast 10 years ago. And here we are, present day. And you're like, oh, what I do is, and I'm like, oh my God, that worked for you. That's so touching. You don't know how fulfilling that is to hear,
Well, yeah. I mean, yes, I can imagine because like I said, it makes a huge difference rather than trying to force her to eat food, that she's not hungry for.
She could be one of those people who, if that happened, ends up having an adversarial relationship with food one day.
Yeah, and that's definitely something we think about a lot and try very hard to make sure that we are not creating.
Yeah, I think it's important. And it's funny too, because that's not why I did it, right? The reason I did it the first time was because I wanted Arden to play basketball without her blood sugar getting too high.
Yep.
And it took people coming on the podcast who had eating disorders to talk about why that was so important to them. Why food and the way it's spoken about and, that need to eat or I don't eat when I'm not hungry and how that can reshape some people's minds. And
yeah,
I had to learn enough about that to speak about it the way I do now too. And it's just been a really wonderful process. I'm starting to get to that point in my life, Alyssa, and you're not going to know this because you're really young still, where I start feeling oh, this is the last third of my life. And I'm just starting to understand everything.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, it definitely made a huge difference for us.
Yeah. Oh, I'm glad. I'm very glad. And I appreciate you sharing that with me. Is there anything we haven't talked about that we should have?
I don't think so. I think we kind of covered everything that I'd want to talk about. Mainly, the biggest reason that I wanted to come talk to you was because I see so many, even on the Juicebox group sometimes, of parents who, doctors are telling them, no, you can't do that. Or that's not how we do it here. And obviously that was something that we were told too. But I just think it's really important, whether it's for you or for your child, that you are advocating for what you think is best for yourself or for them.
The only reason Arden is wearing an Omnipod is because when somebody said something to me, I was like, no, I'm going to do this. And I appreciate your input, but here's how I see it.
Here's how we're going to do it.
Yeah. So,
yeah. And that's how she ended up on a pump, in the hospital.
Right. No, of course. And you even filling out information, on the car ride. Yeah. That's fantastic. I love that idea. Your husband was probably like, all right.
No, I mean,
was he in or what was he?
My husband definitely, he knew about diabetes, obviously, because I had already had diabetes for so long. He knew about it, but he never, he didn't give me insulin. He did not fully understand the carb calculating and things like that. So when we got the little bit of education in the hospital, which was a small amount, it was more so for him because that doing it for her was definitely a new experience for him.
Is he very involved in it now?
Yes, he is. When he and I are together, we definitely still talk things out. Like, okay, her number's, rising, should I give her an extra 0.2? What do you think? Mm-hmm. Or, we didn't pre-bolus as well as we wanted to. So her number is going to rise. Should we maybe give a little extra? How much do you think? But when I'm not there, like when my husband takes her to the grocery store or is picking her up, at the end of the workday, he is making the same decisions that I would make for myself or for her.
That's great. Oh, that's wonderful. And
yeah.
And do you allow him to know more about your diabetes now? Or is that still about
this? He definitely. So when I was pregnant with her, he definitely learned more, mainly because I had to have such tight control while I was pregnant with her. And then obviously once she was diagnosed, he learned more about the way that I manage my own diabetes.
I see. So if he sees you not taking good care of yourself, does he say something?
Yes, he does.
Oh. Well.
He is the only person who follows my Dexcom.
And how do you feel about that?
There are some days where I'm like, yes, like I know, you're right. I need to, my number's rising. I need to take some insulin, or, oh, I'm low. I need to have a juice. Mm-hmm. And there are other times where I'm like, I already gave the insulin. You don't need to say it to me.
Leave me alone.
Yes. He's the only one who follows my Dexcom.
I'm telling you right now, all week long, Arden, like we were together, like we stayed together. I mean, all 6 nights in 2 different hotels because we kind of traveled around a little bit. Absolutely fine. She, there were times where she'd be like, hey, here's my phone. Why don't you do this? I don't want to do it this time, but it's so cool to watch you. Like the idea was I don't have to take care of lunch. And I'm very careful about how we talk about it. Like as she gets older, obviously I'm not up her ass about it and everything like that.
Yep.
She was very open to speaking about it because I was like, Arden, listen, this is a good opportunity for us to be together to make some adjustments to your settings and stuff like that. So we were doing all that. She was all good with it. And then we were gone for 48 hours and we were on the phone and I said, hey, did you have trouble shooting the GLP? Because she's not a big fan of the needles. She goes, leave me alone. And I'm like, well, what happened? We had such a good rapport last week. I was like, no, I know you don't like the needles, so I was wondering if it went okay. She goes, you're trying to make sure that I took it. And I have to be honest with you, Alyssa, that is what I was doing, Alyssa.
That was what you're doing.
Yeah. So I'm going to have to get even more stealthy, I guess, in the future. It was interesting how she was okay with it when we were together and everything felt a little more like parent-child. It feels like she's younger when we're together like that. And then the minute we're gone and she's living by herself, she's like, I don't need your help, old person. Yeah. And I was like, oh, I got it. It's so cool. But anyway, I'll tell you what, I'll tell you this the first time I'll say this in the podcast. While we were down there, she has some pretty significant problems with her dorm room, like the actual physical room, like humidity in it and temperature and mold and,
That doesn't surprise me in the South.
Ants and roaches and mouse. Okay, that kind of stuff. So, so she's like, I'm getting an apartment. And I'm like, Okay. So, you take basically the amount of money you're spending on room and board at the school and you go, okay, well, that's the amount of money we have to get you into a different place, And so we looked around and actually found a studio where she wanted to have a roommate to get her bigger place, but it's hard to find somebody who can commit to like both years and everything like that. And so we ended up landing on a studio. So Arden's going to be living by herself, like completely by herself, starting, in September.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's scary. At the same time, all right, well, it's going to be what it's going to be. So, although during the tour, my wife asked the realtor person from the apartment building, she goes, how do emergency services get into the building after hours?
It's not a bad question to ask.
Yeah. The woman looked at her like, what do you plan on having happen? She's like, they have their own key. So if you were to call 911 from your apartment, they can come through all the security and go right to your apartment. And Kelly's like, okay, thanks.
And she's like, okay, that's fine.
Yeah. And then there was this weird pause. And I said, Arden's just a big heroin fiend. And we like her to be able to, she nods out sometimes. And Arden's like, what are we doing? And I was like, oh, we're having fun. And so, so the girl, they don't hear you right away. Because there's no person on the planet who says to an apartment realtor, I have a heroin problem. So that's not a thing they're accustomed to hearing. And so
how did she react?
Well, I watched her brain process it. And then she turned back to me and went, what was that? And I was like, I was just kidding. She has type 1 diabetes. And we just want to make sure, if there's a problem, she can get the emergency service can have access. And she goes, okay. And I was like, oh my God, that's that old joke where people come up to you and go, I don't know, guess who's pregnant or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like, not me. And you're like, oh, yay, me.
Yep.
So I made it worse. And then I made it better. And she was like, oh, diabetes, that sounds way better than heroin addiction. I was like, yeah. Right. It's going to be fine. Anyway.
Well, that's one of the biggest benefits, though. If you follow her Dexcom, you'll be able to see, if there is a problem and she's not answering.
It's 100%. I don't know how. I guess we do know how other people do it, right? They keep their blood sugars higher. That's just what they end up doing.
And that's the thing, if her CGM, when it's warming up for that 2 hours, I'm like, oh my God, this feels like it's forever. I don't, this is taking forever. I just want to see what the number is. Well, I'm how did my parents all those years?
They weren't thinking about it. It was a different thing.
How many, they woke up a lot to take my blood, but I was like, I cannot imagine.
Yeah. No, I know.
Feeling that way.
It'd make you crazy. Well, the G7 now is 30-minute warm up.
I know. And we want the G7, but since she's using auto mode until it hooks up with the algorithm, we're not switching.
I got to be honest. I think it's going to be pretty soon. So,
I really hope so.
Yeah. But by the time, to be perfectly honest, by the time this comes out, I would expect that Omnipod 5 works with Dexcom G7. So,
I really hope so. Yeah, my mother-in-law has a G7 and I saw how small it was. I was like, oh, that would be so great. Because my daughter, my 3-year-old, so small.
Yeah. No, I understand. They try so hard to make that stuff tiny. I'll never forget. I was working with Omnipod, writing for their blog years ago. And Arden had the original Omnipod. So if you can imagine how big Omnipod DASH or 5 is right now, the original Eros pod.
So much bigger.
Well, it was bigger. But it was still such an accomplishment, this insulin and the batteries and all the technologies in such a small place, And then they moved to the pod got smaller. And I remember a person working at Omnipod said, we used to have a picture of Arden hanging up here with an Omnipod on to remind us that it wasn't as small as we thought it was. To kind of keep us thinking about that, which I thought was really cool.
And that's interesting that you say that because me wearing an Omnipod, it does seem so small.
Yeah.
But on a tinier person's body, it doesn't seem as small.
No, right. Yeah. And Arden was skinny and little and she'd have it on and there's a picture of her somewhere and it was hung up and the woman said, I would look at that and think, we got to make that thing smaller if we can.
Make it smaller.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. But anyway, I'm so happy that you guys are doing well. And I appreciate you spending your time with me for the last hour talking about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Hold on one second.
Okay.
The conversation you just heard was sponsored by Dexcom and the Dexcom G7. Learn more and get started today at dexcom.com/juicebox. A huge thank you to one of today's sponsors, Gvoke Glucagon. Find out more about Gvoke HypoPen at gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. You spell that GVOKEGLUCAGON.com/juicebox. If you're newly diagnosed, check out the Bold Beginnings series. Find it at juiceboxpodcast.com up in the menu, in the featured tab of the private Facebook group, or go into the audio app you're listening in right now and search for Juicebox Podcast Bold Beginnings. Juicebox is one word, Juicebox Podcast Bold Beginnings. This series is perfect for newly diagnosed people. I want to thank you so much for listening and remind you, please subscribe and follow to the podcast wherever you're listening right now. If it's YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other audio app, go hit follow or subscribe, whichever your app allows for, and set up those downloads so you never miss an episode, especially in Apple Podcasts. Go into your settings and choose download all new episodes. Hey, what's up, everybody? If you've noticed that the podcast sounds better and you're thinking like, how does that happen? What you're hearing is Rob at Wrong Way Recording doing his magic to these files. So if you want him to do his magic to you, wrongwayrecording.com. You got a podcast? You want somebody to edit it? You want Rob. Tickets for the 2025 Juice Cruise are limited. I'm not just saying that. They actually are limited. We have a certain window to sell them in, and then that's it. Juiceboxpodcast.com. Scroll down to the Juice Cruise banner, click on it, find a cabin that works for you, and register right now. You are absolutely limited by time on this one. I'm so sorry to say that. It sounds pushy, but it's the absolute truth. Juice Cruise 2025. I hope to see you there. We're going to get a tan, talk about diabetes, and meet a ton of great people who are living with diabetes. It's kind of going to be like floating diabetes camp, but you won't have to sleep in a log cabin. You'll get a tan, and it's not just for adults or kids. It's for everybody.